Hey guys, I'm back today working with Alan to talk about some of the most common errors we see in the low bar squat. Alan went over the basic teaching method of this style of squatting in a recent video. If you're unfamiliar with the technique, I'd recommend starting there. And if you prefer the high bar squat, front squat, or some other style of squatting, that's cool too. I'm sure you'll all be letting us know in the comments section. But for today's purposes, we'll focus on the low bar technique. Of course, it should be pointed out that errors can occur at essentially every step of the setup and execution of the lift. The purpose of this video is not to point out every possible error, just some of the most common ones that we see. Let's start with the setup. The first error we'll discuss involves how the bar is gripped on the back. Assuming it's been placed into the correct position, just below the scapular spine, the correct grip places the wrists into a neutral position, and the forearms and elbows are closely aligned with the torso. The typical error we see in this step involves trainees rolling their hands up over the barbell, putting their wrists into flexion, and holding the bar in place with the heel of their palms, often with their fingers off the bar entirely. This raises the elbows far too high, causing a tendency for the thoracic spine to flex during the squat. This, combined with the lack of a secure grip in the fingers, allows the bar to roll up the neck. As a result, the lifter will often have to compensate by staying far more upright than is ideal in the low bar squat. To fix this, the wrist should be put into a neutral position, and the elbows should be held down close to the torso. I'll sometimes cue people to pin their elbows to their sides. It's also not necessary to actively push the elbows forward during the descent of the squat. In general, we prefer that everything that is not a prime mover to be locked in place throughout the movement. And if a lifter can't maintain a neutral wrist, then a little bit of extension is preferable to flexion. The second common error we'll discuss involves how to descend in the low bar squat. Many lifters have heard of world record holding multiply lifters who yell at each other to sit back while they squat. Regular trainees will often exaggerate this cue themselves, sitting back at the hips and maintaining a near vertical shin angle while they descend. Sometimes they've been told that the knees should never travel forward beyond the toes, an incorrect piece of advice that has created lots of problems for lifters and coaches alike. An even more common error involves descending with a far too vertical back angle, essentially trying to low bar squat using the mechanics of a high bar squat. These issues are easily fixed by cueing the lifter to allow the knees to travel further forward in the first scenario, or to bend over more in the second scenario. But another very useful clue that something is wrong during the descent is the distribution of weight across the feet. Ideally, the combined center of mass of the barbell lifter system is held in perfect balance over the midfoot throughout the lift. This means that the feet should be glued to the floor, ideally with no visible movement occurring. If you see a lifter's toes wiggle up off the floor, for example, if they initiate the squat by breaking at the hips and sitting back too far, you automatically know that their weight is shifted back towards the heels. If, on the other hand, the heels come up off the floor, for example, in someone who's staying too upright, you know their balance is shifted forward towards the toe. The typical novice trainee has absolutely no awareness of where their balance is centered. It's just not something they've paid any attention to before. The first step is to simply point out to them what we're observing and draw their attention to where the pressure is centered on their foot. I'll have them start by intentionally shifting their weight forward onto their toes, then rock back onto their heels, and then find their midfoot. From here, I'll have them do a slow, controlled squat, taking anywhere from 3 to 5 seconds to reach the bottom, with the expectation that they stay on their midfoot throughout the descent. If I see any shift in balance, even the most subtle movement, they stand back up and start over, descending even more slowly the next time to give them time to develop an awareness of their midfoot balance. This drill often fixes a number of upstream issues in the squat, all while practicing the squat itself, rather than wasting time with a variety of nonspecific corrective exercises. Additionally, these same concepts apply to midfoot balance from side to side. In other words, fixing trainees who shift to the outer edges of their feet when they shove their knees out too far, or who shift onto the inner edges of their feet when their knees cave in. Ultimately, the goal is perfect balance with appropriate angles at the shin, knee, hip, and back for the lifter's proportions. The final error we'll discuss today involves the ascent of the squat. Alan discussed the concept of hip drive in his first video. However, this remains a difficult concept for some trainees to learn and ingrain. They will often want to rise out of the bottom of the squat by immediately opening their hip angle and leading with the chest. This technique fails to make use of the mechanical advantages of low bar positioning, and often results in a dramatic decline in bar speed and ultimately missed reps under heavy weights. Conversely, some trainees over-exaggerate the hip drive cue and focus so much on it that they lose their back angle and end up doing a good morning. This, of course, is not how we teach the squat. It's okay to bend over in the low bar squat, and when driving out of the bottom, it's okay to stay bent over for a little longer than you want to, driving through the sticking point right above parallel before standing up straight at the top. However, you don't want to get loose coming out of the bottom and immediately lose your back angle either. I'll often have people think about pointing their chest at the same spot they're staring at on the floor, about 5 or 6 feet in front of them, and try to keep it there as they descend. If the back angle stays the same, or if you see a slightly more horizontal back angle coming out of the bottom, it's a good bet that you're using your hips properly. If the back angle immediately becomes more vertical out of the bottom, you're probably doing it wrong. Well, that's all I've got for you today. I hope this was helpful in clarifying a few common errors and misconceptions about the low bar squat. I'll see you next time.
Here we go.